It is my great pleasure to introduce our speaker for today. Madhu Fall is the Chief Executive Officer of Husky Consulting, a West Africa-based consulting firm specializing in strategic and policy advisory services to governments, development partners, and businesses. His focus is on innovative technologies, policy design, and investment opportunities across Africa. And in this capacity, Madhu has recently also led the market research on innovative sanitation opportunities in Burkina Faso, Cote d'Ivoire, Kenya, Nigeria, and Senegal on behalf of FSMA Alliance and with funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The study involved analyzing the current sanitation market landscape, opportunities and gaps, as well as developing recommendations for a viable innovation sanitation market in these target countries. And this study is also part of the background for this session, how this session came together. Just to name a few of his prior engagements, he has also served as a strategic advisor to the government of Senegal. He also consulted for USAID in Niger and MasterCard Foundation in Uganda, and also helped implement the Innovative Business Plan competition in Cote d'Ivoire. In addition to his experience, he holds degrees in commerce, administration, and finance, as well as accounting and business law. So that's all from his official bio, which he gave me for the webinar. However, on Twitter, I learned that he is also a marathon runner, a lifestyle coach, and co-founder of a fashion brand. So that's all very impressive, and I'm very excited to have him with us today. So yes, Madhu, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jan, for that introduction. My privilege to share some of the learnings from that study, and also want to take this opportunity to say hi to everyone, but also expect this to be as fruitful as possible, but also a platform to hear and share some of the ideas and experience from your respective countries. And I see people connecting from all over the world, which is great. So some of the findings here, hopefully, even though it's focused in Senegal, in West Africa and Kenya, might also be relevant to other countries, or there might be some learnings that we can draw from other countries, particularly as you will see later in the housing space. So I'm going quickly to jump to the next session. So as Jane has already introduced us, you know a bit of our background, Husky, but we are a consulting firm, but also implementation. We co-design solutions across various sectors. Sanitation is just one of them. And also have a capacity, expertise in various topics. So happy to share more with you respectively, and I will share my contacts at the end of this presentation. Regarding the purpose of this session, as we see here, we want to focus about opportunities. There is a lot of background in terms of basic access, and also the framework, the global framework that the WHO and UNICEF have put together as joint evaluation. So we're not going to delve into that gap analysis. So the focus we took on this study was to really start with the hypothesis that there is a way, there is a space for innovative sanitation. Business as usual might not necessarily be, is part of the solution, but would not necessarily help achieve universal health, universal access to basic sanitation, as outlined in all of these countries by 2030. So that means you will see previous in the next slide that the focus is more on the opportunity side. Of course, there are aspects that we have analyzed, particularly on the enabling market. So we looked at different opportunities where there is a space for sanitation. innovative sanitation, starting off with the housing. We also looked at businesses that are using lots of water, tap water, with the emphasis, with the entry point of how water reuse from processing wastewater could lead to reduction in demand for tap water. So businesses were analyzed, particularly the tourism sector, but also the gas stations and also transportation systems. We looked at various opportunities, but one that stand out the most in terms of accelerating adoption is the social housing, with the unique opportunity here to package the technologies differently to address this gap. What the most important part here is aggregated demand. So we have innovative sanitation technologies such as the portable solutions that are actually distributed, particularly in Kenya, for some of you who are based in Kenya. So we have the likes of Synergy and other technologies who are providing last mile technologies for households. But on the other hand, we have this big national government program, social housing, that are aiming to accelerate access to housing at affordable cost. But the government puts behind those programs lots of incentives to create interest from the private sector. So they basically want to build new cities that are targeting the middle class and even lower class. And sometimes they have these requirements in terms of design, saying this is the shape or the size of this house. It has to have such as this number of rooms, etc., etc. When we look at those frameworks or schemes, there is an opportunity for the innovative sanitation technologies to use those programs as an entry point. At the government level, how can we have the discussion or incentive with the government to have kind of the requirement for those programs to include some opportunities for the innovative sanitation? And these programs have an opportunity to serve as an aggregated demand that would be hard to reach at large scale if you target this market at an individual level. Because this market, as you see here, are not necessarily kind of B2C, such as businesses directly selling the sanitation technologies to the users. Generally, they are led by the businesses who are building these houses, the real estate developers. In Senegal, for instance, or in Nigeria, you have these big players, real estate developers who have this government grant or a lot over multiple years to build a new city. That's the one who we should target. They might build real estate development ranging from anywhere between 100 to 400 or even 500 house units. And the idea here is how we consider working with them directly to address this market. And at the global scale, this is something that we can see across Africa. But even in the 4 countries we looked at, there is the expectation to build over 600 units by 2020. And there are already some ongoing construction happening. And this is the current landscape of how they are building, how they are building what are the technologies that are being used. So currently they use mostly septic tanks across these countries, and for each building they have to invest around 1,000 to 1,500 to set up the septic tank for each housing unit. So if you aggregate that at the state level, you see how much money it can represent. And annually, they could pay anywhere between 70 to 100 for emptying. And we know that sometimes even this value chain is not efficient, as there is little to none processing happening and treatment at the low end. And this is the perspective if you take it from just the one given household. For Burkina Faso, for instance, you have a number of housing units per year, which is constructed through this program, and you have the high end in Nigeria 6K per year, and which are kind of for a number of users anywhere between 115 to 270 in Senegal. And what we highlighted here is how much capex is invested in per real estate and how much opex it represents per year. That represents an opportunity to capture for the innovative sanitation manufacturers. And this is the case for Kenya. For Kenya, we looked at housing broadly. We also looked at offices and malls and industrial parks. Why? Because it's relatively more advanced, and we see even some use cases of innovative sanitation technologies in the second and the third industrial parks and also the offices. And like in West Africa, we also see a huge opportunity for social housing, with the current construction being close to what we see in Nigeria, 50K per year, and the government even targeting to double that on an annual basis. So there is a push from the government to accelerate the emergence of new cities under the social housing program. What is interesting in Kenya is there is a strong incentive because water scarcity is a big issue. And that's also the case in Burkina Faso, as being in the Sahel area. And that coupled with the high cost of sewage connection fees. So that for every household, or the government has created these fees that if you want to connect to the sewer system, you have to pay up to 75% of your water bill. So that represents an incentive to adopt technology that would eliminate or reduce the running cost. At a grand scheme of things, this is how things are captured. As you see in West Africa, there is a huge cost that could be eliminated at the water supply level, because most of this water could be replaced by reuse cases such as cleaning, such as gardening, if the water is well processed, and also at the treatment. The treatment is mostly the fees they pay, the 75% that the one who have access to the sewer system pay. The challenge then, which is the next step for ISTs, innovative sanitation developers, is to make sure that from an economic perspective, the technology that we are putting in these markets are competitive. A good benchmark could be how much people are paying over 10 years, for instance, and you have the numbers here. As you can see, for the offices and industrial park, they're mostly using a sewer connection, so they pay little to money at for the usage. But a lot of money is paid in the upfront at the treatment. Most of the money is captured on in the treatment because they have to pay 75% of their water utilization. And we can also, by the same way, reduce the water expenses. And some use cases that we've seen in some industrial parks and offices could lead anywhere between 50% to 80% reduction in their water demand. Now, how we could consider entering this market, particularly the social housing approach. As you see, it's a B2B. We're proposing a B2B. How could the solution that should be considered could be anchored around real estate developers? How the design, the product should be packaged in a way that would allow the real estate developers, if they look at how much they're investing per house unit, which is, as you indicated in earlier, anywhere between 1,000 to 1,500 across countries. And if we assume that there are anywhere between 100 to 400 housing units, that's a lot of money at the capex level. How could we package the technology in a way that would incentivize them to adopt the IST we're putting forward? And here's the solution we're proposing. We assume that at the front end, the user experience would be the same. We would be still connecting the pipes, etc. But the solution resides in building a decentralized unit with the capacity to process water, and for anywhere between 200 to 400 housing units per state. And also building the reuse, bundle that with the reuse case, such as if they haven't yet built the estate, there might be an opportunity to have orchards, if the water could be used for gardening, for instance. Or if some of the byproducts could be also fertilizers, and we have already seen this at the national level, particularly in Senegal. We have an omniprocessor who's actually generating extra fertilizers, but also water for reuse, etc. Now, how can we bring those type of package at the more decentralized level so that the real estate developer is incentivized to use it? Because before we even speak to reuse cases, when you look at the economics, it makes sense, because now they're paying anywhere between 180 to 200K per housing unit, per estate. How could be captured already? And that might also be a case for future users. The houses are generally sold as a already built and everything in set. You just take the key and enter in, ready to install. When the household are in, they're not necessarily going to pay recurrent fees for emptying, etc. So there's also an incentive for them. So this is the solution we're proposing, is more about packaging the technology and also bringing it at a size that would make economic sense, but also making it competitive if you compare it with existing solutions, which are septic tanks, latrines, and also the sewer system. So we have also looked at this model for other countries, but the opportunity to consider this opportunity is, even though the focus was on 5 countries, we saw that across Africa, generally there are at least some of these type of interventions by the government in terms of social housing. That means from a scalability perspective, this is a nice opportunity to capture. But for this to happen, there are lots of opportunities that needs there are lots of challenges that needs to be addressed. First, starting with building the demand creation. There is a need to establish funding schemes targeting real estate developers, because there is one which is they're building houses, like they might build 5 houses, sell it, and then build another bunch of 5. So if you ask them to upfront give you 200K, they might not necessarily be able to do it. So it's kind of about making it around financing the IST that they're going to adopt. But they need also to be convinced for the potential. So kind of having these pilots with one of them so that people can come and visit and see. This is really critical for them to be able to adopt the technology. There is lots of hesitance in terms of new technologies, particularly if they're not sure whether the whole value chain is built, as we will see later. It's not necessarily about buying the product, but they want that if they buy it, if it's broken, there is someone nearby who can fix it, and it's not expensive. There is also on the government side the need to regulate and nudging real estate developers to invest in suitable and effective sanitation technologies. What we see more and more in these countries, there is a kind of sometimes the government is not pushing them into building the shared infrastructure, sanitation technologies in before even people buy the house. So the government might make, and we see that in Cote d'Ivoire, there is a requirement for real estate developers to invest in the sanitation of their state. That's the right thing to do, and something that could be generalized and made as the kind of the norm. On the investment mobilization side, I think this is one of the reasons FMSA is playing this role in building this network. How could your platform serve as an accelerator to make the case and accelerate the market and bring investors and creating connection and facilitating manufacturers in other countries such as China, India, South Africa, and other countries with local partners in this region. And that's something that I think would be important to push forward. The supply side is a big critical one. And this is something that is of concern, to be honest, for most of the market tests we try to do. We did some assessment of the case scenario and test what would be the ideal situation for real estate developers to adopt this. But the technology, the supply side is really one of the big things. As mentioned earlier, they want to have not only the technology, but the guarantee that there is an after-sales service, a well-effective, well-functioning supply side of things would be like if they adopt the technology, could they install it themselves, or could we make sure that the local plumbers or people operating in the sanitation today could install them? Would it be the same cost? So that would not drive cost heavily. Or if it is broken, can they have someone locally who can fix it? And we looked at different models, one which is having a full-fledged service, such as having one dedicated, if the technology is sophisticated, to have a big player in country who could actually manage the value chain from end to end, one, and then later on multiply or train other services. There is also one which is working with training institutions, particularly in Kenya, where we have identified a list of training institutions in the sanitation space and build the future workers in the innovative sanitation space. This is really critical. It's not necessarily about a push market, which is the product is here, buy it. The people need to make sure that when they install it, they're not going to have any issues. The quality first, which is already dealt with by the ISO compliancy, but also making sure that if it's broken, there is locally available capacity to fix it. On the enabling side, which is the last point before we enter into the Q&A, the government financing, there is a big role. Government has a big role to play here, particularly on lots of infrastructure. The government is building stadiums, building universities. The government is building dormitories and the military camps. There are lots of kind of infrastructure buildings happening from the government in different sectors, and some of them have sanitation, and generally they're not necessarily like at a isolated, like big scale utilization of water, such as a big hospital. All of those could actually be the next adopters of the ISTs and create the market for operators. The funding as well, there is a requirement or recommendation for the government to establish a fund, a sanitation fund. Some of them have already had that, but not necessarily focused on innovative sanitation. On also pushing the regulatory framework towards the ISO adoption, but also making it more of an incentive. The ISO put the norm, but also the government has to put the incentives for the private sector and all the actors to adopt this technology. So this is, in a nutshell, the opportunities focus on sanitation technologies in housing sector and real estate broadly in Kenya, and a quick entry market packaging, how we could package the technology so that it's suitable for the market, and the support needed for this market to thrive. So let me pause there to see whether there are any questions or any contributions from this. Thank you very much. Over to you, Jan.
Thank you, Modu, for this very comprehensive presentation. Very insightful indeed. Once again, I'd like to encourage everyone in the audience, if you would like Modu to dive into any of the topics that he discussed, if you want him to dive deeper into any of them, please let us know in the chat. But first of all, a very practical question, Modu. I could send another follow-up note to all attendees. Are you willing to share the presentation, the slides?
Yes, I will share with you, and then you can circulate to them.
Perfect. Yeah. So yes, we can do that. That is great. Then the first question from Isha was about the establishment of sanitation funds, which was on one of the last 3 slides, I think. Can you share a bit more about this? Has this been done already, or is this just a suggestion of what needs to happen in the future?
Yeah, it hasn't been done. It's more a suggestion for the future. The challenge is the rationale is currently when the real estate developers are investing in sanitation, they're building in batches. They have when I say one block, they might build one block of houses and do the whole set of investment, and generally 20% of the investment for the whole building might be dedicated to sanitation technologies. But when you want them to adopt this technology, you're asking them to put upfront lots of money to acquiring that kind of the decentralized processing unit. It might cost more than just you asking them to mobilize upfront 10% or 20% of their budget, construction budget. And even given that the money is not sitting somewhere that they could mobilize quickly and write a check, most of them are like, this is economic, makes sense if I look at the overall cost at the end of this project, but I cannot mobilize that much money. So the recommendation is, what if there might be a setup where it might be putting a grant fund or challenge fund that could actually vet those projects when they pass the screen, and with government approval, they can now be pre-funded by the banks, etc. But there is at least one owner of that fund who's actually making sure that the cash flow issue is not the kind of the challenge for adopting these technologies. So it's kind of a recommendation, something that has been done in other areas, such as de-risking investments, and that could be applied for this one. It's kind of a cash flow issue.
Got it. Very interesting, yeah. No more questions in the chat yet. As we don't have that many questions. Oh, there's another one coming into. Another thing we could do, if anybody wants to comment and wants to unmute and speak up in the session, that's also something that we could do. So if anybody would want to raise a point by speaking up, please raise your hand, and then we could give you the floor, but please keep it short if we open the floor. But please raise your hand first if you'd like to speak up and join the discussion verbally. But then the next question from Christine in the meantime is, how open is the market to waterless sanitation technologies?
So I think it's open. The market is really open. I think the key thing here is about the cost first. Cost is a big driver first, and also the use cases. If the use cases aren't necessarily going like kind of you don't have to work on acceptability of drinking that processed water. And we saw in particularly in West Africa that sometimes even reusing the water for recurrent household chore is not acceptable, is not kind of something that is easily accepted, even though from a scientific perspective, from a quality perspective, the water might be safe to drink or to cook with. It might not be accepted. So it's more about making sure first that the cost barrier, so people are saying, this is not necessarily, I know the value of adopting this technology, but it's too costly. If you address that. And the second, which is, I know it's worth, but I cannot mobilize the money, you solve that with the funds. The other is more on the acceptability, the use cases. Is it something that people would actually do without any issue? One particular case there is in West Africa, we saw one case for public toilets. For the reuse cases, as the public toilets has also sometimes where people could go and do their ablutions when they purification, which is a religious kind of a requirement. So people are not necessarily going to use any of that water for that. That means if you have those lots of water that is being cleaned, processed, treated, and ready for reuse, but the in-situ reuse cases aren't suitable for them, you might necessarily build, you might be in a situation where you have to build the storage, because that excess water has to be stored somewhere or thrown away. So that becomes a logistics problem, because the reuse cases suitable or accepted as of today are not necessarily ready to adapt to technologies. But I think from a kind of waterless, such as just taking the fecal sludge, extract the water and making kind of fertilizers, that's something that could work, because it's not necessarily something that is consumed directly. But in any case, you might work on acceptability of those fertilizers, as people might actually see it as directly close to what they're going to eat. But the waterless technology has a space, definitely, particularly in Kenya.
Okay, great, thank you. Another question that I had when you were describing about, that an enabling environment is needed, and you talked a bit about standards and regulations. And that's something that we're also looking into at the moment with FSMA. So could you tell us a bit more on what's the state in the countries that you analyzed, about what kind of sanitation standards and regulations are available on the local, or like on the national and the local levels, and are they being applied properly, and is it useful to have them?
Yeah, so on the ISO standards, all of the five countries have already adopted them. So from kind of having the kind of the backbone of the quality and the norms, it's already adopted. There were a question of kind of the solution being so the how suitable the technology could be for the market, such as these questions of quality related to specific use cases, which is not addressed. And that might mean that the government might later, depending on the needs, have another layer of regulation, taking the local specificities into account. But I think from a kind of overarching perspective, the backbone is already there, but definitely each country will have then to work on the requirements. What I was saying, for instance, if you want to design such a technology, such as the bundling we're proposing here, is not yet regulated. And you cannot necessarily let it be whatever it can be, but at least there should be some norms, because if this is not done well designed, it's easy to have it conceptualized here, but more work would be needed to make sure that you're not under sizing it so that after 5 years, it's beyond control. And you cannot, after 5 years, just come back and replace everything at once. It might be actually need kind of some framing, some framework to make sure that there is a pathway, a regulation into these decentralized units in the context of Senegal, which might be different than in the context of Burkina Faso, because the use cases and what government or what the population wants is different from one country to the other, even though by design, that seems to be same solution, but they need, each country has to be, each market has to be, each technology has to be tailored for the market. And there is definitely room for the regulation to play its role there for normalization and to give a sense of development. And one related area is the government might actually make it kind of a requirements. If you want to do this, you might, one of the requirements is to make sure that there is a availability of the supply chain from end to end. You have to demonstrate that, for instance, if you install this technology, import it from some of the producing countries, as we are not producing them, the government might play a big role to push the suppliers to make sure that the services that are needed to operate, maintain, and repair the technology is there. Otherwise, they might, the ones who are adopting it might be exposed to the quality, even though from a standard perspective, the ISO perspective, they might be compliant, but in terms of market fit and suitability, there is definitely need to work on that front. And it's not necessarily easy, because that's kind of you need to find the right balance between national tailorization versus standardization.
So what you're saying is that, okay, it would need, or it would require very kind of like regional or national frameworks and regulations rather than a global framework.
Yeah. And that could be done at the regional level. And for instance, the regional body, the regional economic communities, ECOWAS, for instance, for West Africa, could be the body for that, so that you're not tailoring for Nigeria or tailoring specifically for Senegal, but there is kind of agreed supply chain development for this bundled solution. In East Africa, it might be the same SADC, for instance, or Eastern African Community. And in Southern Africa, that would be also the same. So you have, in Africa, across Africa, you would have 5 bodies, 5 different norms, and definitely some learnings from one to the other that would actually standardize, or at least put at least the minimum requirements for this technology to be operationalized in each of those regions, 5 regions across the continent.
Right. Thank you. Another question came in from Malik. Any particular technology that is used already to transform sludge into fertilizer? And if yes, where and which technology? So
yeah,
in the countries that you observed, were there any learnings in this regard?
We have some of them. For instance, in Burkina Faso, there are some at the lab university kind of prototype like even low cost that kind of turn the sludge into fertilizers. And even on the picture you saw on this webinar invitation is one from Nigeria, where the urine is taken and with some chemicals it's transformed into fertilizers. So we have those use cases, but generally they are at the low scale level, kind of one individual doing it, not necessarily something that is kind of a momentum happening at the larger scale. On the other extreme, we have also the omniprocessors, one in Senegal, for instance, which is the national sludge manager. who's actually building the facility, targeting a whole city such as Dakar, the capital of Senegal. So that unit is based here, kind of replacing the traditional sludge technologies with that. And we see that, and they're producing fertilizers, even some being using some of the electricity generated as part of the inputs. So we have those use cases. What we don't have much of and not exist is this large scale, massive adoption like integrated with the housing development. We don't have that. As what we have now is a large or kind of a strong integration between septic tanks consumption and latrine utilization and consumption with the housing sector. That exists already because they are the norm. They're traditional technologies that are being adopted. Now, what we're proposing is it might be too late or too costly to upgrade existing buildings to make sure that every building in Dakar or in Lagos is equipped with this technology. It might be so expensive, retrofitting and everything and changing the piping, it might be too late. But as the government is pushing over the next 5, even like this is just a start, the social housing are here to stay. How can we make sure that we use them as a scheme to push forward the market development of this technology? So that on top of having these isolated, low-scale startup technologies that are celebrated and using this also as a way to, how can we make money out of the sludge processing and treatment? Or the other extreme, the government sewage system being upgraded and taking the high-end technologies. The middle, which is the missing middle, how can we fit it? And that's what we're putting forward here, anchoring it around social housing, but not necessarily targeting the end users, but the one who are building the house, the real estate developers. And there is a whole value chain to develop in that front.
Right. I think actually the next question is very much connected to something that you just mentioned already. Jonathan says, yes, it's really exciting to see sanitation being considered at the housing planning stage, which you just mentioned. And then he asks, do you consider decentralized systems, maybe with modular technology, as a medium-term, e.g. 10 years solution for an integrated citywide system?
Yeah,
I think that connects to some things you have just said already, but do you want to comment on that?
Yeah. So I think the entry point here, and we looked at different options. Because the question we ask is, how can we accelerate adoption, and how can you make sure that cost is not necessarily the first barrier? Before even people look at the technology, when they see it, they say, "Oh, this is really for developed countries." Because the challenge or the might be targeting businesses. And when we looked at public toilets adopting this technology, is not necessarily making any economic sense from a cost perspective. Just looking at where the current technologies are. But we were surprised even ourselves when we saw how much money is invested in sanitation solutions, technologies by design. When you build the house, it could be anywhere between 15 to 50% to 20% of the housing cost that would go to sanitation, just the traditional ones. Now is kind of becomes of economics. Could you build a technology that could fit that range, 15 to 20% of a housing project, real estate project? If that is the case, now how can you make sure that the ones who are actually making the decision have all the requirements? They're looking at cash flow wise, it's okay. There's someone who funded it for me or could fund it for me. It might be, and I like Jonathan's questions of linking it to housing. There's also housing finance that could be bundled with that, so that you're not necessarily building a separate fund. And there is also the question of if I have to adopt, if I adopt this technology, I need to have the guarantee that it will work. If I adopt now the sewer system, I know that when it's broken, someone can fix it. And when it is in the pipe, that's no longer my problem. So the one who's making the decision, the household builder, is not necessarily constrained by whatever or not the sludge manager is doing or not. That becomes a national problem, not a state problem. But if you ask them to adopt this technology, now you're putting the risk of owning the whole value chain on their hands. Now they need to make sure that this in-situ processing unit that you're asking them to build, economically it makes sense. Financially, they can mobilize the resources, but also from sustainability perspective, long-term utilization, they're not at risk of always having to pay repair or to fly someone from elsewhere to fix a broken problem. And we have a case even in Senegal. We have